We're having our second cohort this year. We had our first cohort last year, and we got nothing but praises about this particular program. And you'll see the partnerships that we've had. United Way is a partner, several foundations around the region is a partner, and this has been a real eye-opener for a lot of the developers that want to come in. I just wanted to go to the next slide because I wanted to tell you a little bit about how it works. The Corporation of Supportive Housing, they offer a 10-day practical step toward supportive housing projects. They talk about who should be your service provider. They talk about how you actually build a pro forma around supportive housing. They talk about what your concept is and how you get to be a developer. And then they navigate all the complex stuff associated with applying for the low-income housing tax credit, both in Kansas City and in the other places in Kansas. And so we are all embarking on this in order for us to help small developers and some of those emerging multifamily folks. I will just also just talk about a little bit about one of our third initiatives. It's called the Roll Forward. It's an initiative that we are trying to help those at 30% of median income and trying to get some of the larger developers to give us 10, 20 units, and we're working with the Housing Authority of Kansas City, Missouri, give us units within their projects, and then we support them with services. And so we really are going down the road to help try to figure out how we can bring a lot of these folks together that really have not talked before.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you. And then I want to have a couple of people in the room introduce themselves. Mid-America Regional Council was mentioned a couple of times. Will you please stand up and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kate Killam. I'm with Mid-America Regional Council and Housing Program Manager and get to work with these lovely people.
Right. And she's very important. You started your role when?
I started at the very end of November 2021.
Is it a newly created role?
It's a new role at Mark. Yep.
Okay, so as it relates to housing, affordable housing, you are the person.
I'm the point person right now, yes.
You are, and
Yes.
the Mid-America Regional Council is important to us in bringing us all together. And so thank you, and thank you for being here. And also, Tiffany brought with her a couple of people, and they road warriors. They came in this morning. They're going to turn around and go back to Kansas City today. You can introduce yourself, Tiffany and Nicole. Stand up, stand up, stand up.
And these are the people that make everything run in our rental assistance program. We have an excellent rental assistance program that we're serving so many people. We've been nationally recognized for our rental assistance program and how much collaboration we've had with agencies around the city. And so these two ladies are, both Tiffany and Nicole, have a big part in that.
And tell us which is which. Say your names.
My name is Tiffany Drummer, and I am the supervisor over the tenant advocate section. We work with tenants and landlords, and we just basically provide, let tenants know who they can contact for resources they need, whether it's the health department, the attorney general's office, needing their rent paid, or legal assistance. That's the program that just started with the Right to Counsel program for renters. But we also help landlords if they have any questions or concerns. They can call us as well, and we'll let them know who they can talk to. And if anybody is interested in that presentation, it's back here on my page.
Thank you. Who are you, Nicole?
I'm in the city of Kansas City, Missouri, in the Housing and Community Development Department. I am a tenant advocate, and
And a housing provider advocate too.
and a housing provider advocate too. And I hope to play an intricate role in getting this housing located project up and running.
We look forward to it. And I have to say that, again, setting our table, the people we communicate with, these two ladies, like Jennifer said, they're the front lines. As a housing provider, when we need assistance and our tenants need assistance or any other renters, we have somewhere trusted people that we can point them to, and those ladies right there are the ones that take care of them. And so we appreciate them. They're on the front lines right with us and help us and help our renters. And so rental assistance is key and has been key during the moratorium especially.
And Stacy, can I also just say,
Yes.
key partner is Bliss with us too, and what we're trying to do in the region with the regional housing partnership. So Jeff, sorry,
Introduce
we're just
yourself,
a big
please.
collaborative group today.
We are, and that's wonderful.
Jeff from Listen.
Thanks, Jeff. But again, teamwork and the table, these are all people at our table. And so now I'm going to kind of bring it down a little bit. I'm going to talk about some of the barriers that we face. So again, when we talk about the people who actually provide the housing, that's me. What barriers do I face? What keeps me from providing housing or more housing, or what gets me out of the business? And so some of the barriers, I'm going to talk about rent control. These are things that are not in our city, thank goodness, in Kansas City, because at the state level it's preempted. They can't put rent control or rent stabilization in place. However, I have peers in like New York and California who have rent control in place. And I do know that it's a conversation that's happening around here. But what I'm saying is if you're thinking that rent control is an option to help renters who are cost burdened, wrong way to go. And the reason is because, keeping in mind, I'm a business person, I'm a small business person. All of us who are in business are in business to make profit. What we call profit is our revenue, is what pays our bills, and it covers our overhead, and is what we use to feed our families and pay employees. And so imagine being in business and someone says, hey, we're gonna cap your profits. Are you gonna be excited to be in business? No. And so that's what rent control does. It caps the profits that a housing provider can make. And what we say is that the market sets the rent. If you have more inventory, the rent's gonna be lower. So what we need to do is find ways to get more inventory out there. Instead of trying to squeeze those who are providing the housing and telling them, oh, because the tenants, don't make a certain amount of money and minimum wages, whatever, we need to cap the rent to protect them. You're not protecting them. What you're doing is you're running people like me out of business, and you're costing more units. And so you're limiting the units. And I'll tell you, in this particular marketplace, we're going to talk about it a little bit. I think someone mentioned earlier, Julie maybe, the outside investors that are coming in. And we saw it during the pandemic, and in this marketplace, you have out-of-state investors coming into the Midwest buying real estate because it's cheap. What's going to happen is that those investors, once I say I'm not going to be in business anymore, they're going to come and buy my inventory. As a matter of fact, it's happened. I'll talk about that in a second. And so we need to be careful when we talk rent control. The way you control the rent and get the prices down is to produce more inventory. You're not going to force me to cap my profits and stay in business and stay happy. I'm going to leave. And same with rent stabilization, set aside for tax incentivized projects. And again, many policymakers, people who are not in the business, think this is a beautiful, a great idea, the most brilliant idea ever. Ask the mayor of the city of Kansas City how that looks. We just had 18 months ago, an ordinance that went into place that forced developers, if you were going to be use tax incentives like TIF, if you're going to have a tax incentivized project, that you must set aside a certain percentage for the lower income ranges and for the lower rent ranges. I remember at the time him saying, hey, people were saying that's not going to work. The industry is saying that's not going to work. You can't force people, again, to cut their profits and force them to produce affordable if they want to do a luxury unit. They've done their numbers. They know how much they want to make. And then if you come along and say, hey, you can only, you must give us, 20% of your units must be in this affordable range. They can look around and say, it doesn't pencil out. I'm going to go over here where I can do exactly what I want and charge exactly what I want for the units. And so I remember at the time he said, everybody says the sky is falling, no big deal. 18 months later, a couple of weeks ago, he announced that they're stopping that because they have had 0 new applications. Because developers will look at it and say, I don't have to be here. They can go to any other city, any other state, and they can do the exact project they want to do without being forced. And keeping in mind when projects even qualify for tax incentives, they're blighted. They're in areas that nobody else wants. And so instead of welcoming them and saying, hey, what can we do to help you? We're trying to punish them and force them to give us something that they don't have to. And so again, for me, it's like it's softer and easier to incentivize than to force. And so that policy is now gone because we lost the opportunity for housing over 18 months with the 0 applications because that policy was in place. How many developers looked at Kansas City and passed on it because they didn't want to do what we were trying to force them? So I'm saying be careful when you start looking at set-asides on tax incentivized projects when you're trying to force a developer to do something they don't want to do. You may not hear from them.
And Stacy, I will make one little, he didn't eliminate it, he increased
Changed
the
it,
ceiling of the area minimum income for, it was lower and he upped it by about 10% to see
Okay.
if that, so he's still working on it, right? But was the original, what was set, was that too much of a dampening?
Right.
Will this new one be that much?
Right, and so then the question is, do you do it at all, or do you let the market do what it will do? And so we'll see if he has an experiment out, so we'll see how it happens in the next 18 months. Right to counsel for attorneys. Tiffany mentioned this. This is something else that always sounds good to people. We have to remember with tenants being evicted, and this happened, this passed in Kansas City in December, where right to counsel, and if it's coming to your town, be aware, because it's happening in different places across the country, and they're talking about it. What it does is it guarantees an attorney for any tenant that's being evicted. And so you think, oh, they may need help in court. The data that, what they tell you, with the people who are, and I'll talk about in a minute, tenant advocates, what they'll tell you is that the tenants, 90% of the landlords going to court have an attorney. 90% of the tenants don't have an attorney. What they don't tell you is that if I'm a business, and if I am in the housing business, I'm an LLC, I'm a small business, if I go to court, I am obligated, I'm required to hire an attorney. So it's not that I want to have one, but it's that I must have one. And so that's why 90% of them have attorneys, of us have attorneys, is because by law, we can't practice law without a license, and so I have to hire an attorney. So keep in mind, if I have a tenant that may owe me thousands of dollars, like I just did, I had a tenant that hadn't paid their rent since November. We tried to work with them, a big corporation with them. We tried to work with her dad died, and she was applying for rental assistance, and we know that there was a delay in rental assistance. We tried to work with her, and only 3 weeks ago did we get our money. We worked with her since November. In any event, the majority of the tenants that are being evicted are being evicted for non-payment of rent. How do you prevent the eviction for non-payment of rent? You pay the rent. An attorney's not gonna help you. You have 10 attorneys standing there when you go before the judge is gonna say, you had a contract, did you pay your rent on the first? If the answer is no, you will be evicted. Attorneys lined up all day next to you. The answer, what I said is when this was presented before the committee, instead of spending money, the city allocated $2.5 million, instead of spending $2.5 million on an attorney after the eviction was filed, use it for rental assistance, help them pay the rent, prevent the eviction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And yet it didn't work because for whatever social reasons and people who are elected, they pandered to a tenant advocacy group. And I'm just saying this, I'm putting it out there, I must, and I know we're getting close to questions, but it's important for you to know this from my point of view, how it looks to me, that when I see my city saying, instead of paying for the rent, keeping the person from being evicted, all this money is out there, the federal dollars are out there, instead of helping that family pay the rent, stay housed, keep me in business so I can pay my bills, they chose to allocate $2.5 million to pay attorneys. It's no surprise that several people on the council are attorneys. They took care of their own. This was made clear to me when I talked before that went before the committee. I talked to one of the council members and he said, I already know what you're going to say, Stacey. I'm an attorney, I'm for it. It's like, okay, goodbye. No more conversation, and it passed. And my husband and I, after it passed, looked at each other, we said, we're out. In December, we owned 22 rental units, again, averaging 600 or so per month. Now, we own 8, 9, we sold 13 of them. Immediately, we turned around and sold them. And we will sell more once we find buyers and once we find who we want to buy. Because my thought is, if my city is spending those taxpayer dollars to pay attorneys instead of attorneys, instead of helping people stay housed, to show you what their priorities were, we're out. And we took the money that we sold those properties and put it into short-term rentals in another city that is welcoming of us. And I'm not the only one. The same day that passed, the next day in our email group, I had another housing provider that says, I'm gonna be selling 40 units. Every time they put these policies in place, they lose people. They don't see us, they don't hear us, but we're leading. And remember, I told you my group represented a lot of different you know, the property managers. I'm telling you what we're doing and what's happening, and it finally happened to me. But it took us wasting money on attorneys. They can't stop an eviction. It took that for me to get out. When you see right to counsel, say instead of that, can we use the money to keep people housed, please, instead of paying attorneys on the back end that can't do anything. My fear is when and all they're doing now is connecting people to rental assistance. So when they say we're successful, we've stopped this many evictions, all they're doing is connecting them to United Way or to rental assistance, so they count that as a success. My fear and our fear is once that money is gone, they're gonna start doing other things to delay the eviction and cause the problems. The concern I have is for the renters. When you're in that property past the date you're being evicted, you're not being helped because now the rate, what you owe is going up. You're gonna owe more when you finally do get evicted. I'm gonna be owed more that I will never collect. If we could collect the money that we've had in past evictions where the tenant never paid us, I'd be a wealthy woman. You just don't collect it. Nobody wants an eviction. You're gonna hear someone talking tomorrow about evictions. The answer is we need to find more housing. Evictions happen when you don't pay the rent. Plain and simple, there's no conversation about it. Pay the rent, you will not be evicted. It is that simple. I mean, it's just, I'm not trying to sound heartless. My husband and I housed formerly homeless veterans for years. So we're not heartless. I just purchased the home that we just had finished, that I purchased for a family in my school district that is homeless. We bought it because we want to put a family in it. And so that's my point. I'm just saying this because people don't ever say it, or you don't hear it, or we sound heartless. I'm not heartless. I'm just based on reality. Many people provide us as the bad guys. We have nonprofits that look at us as the competition. We need to all work together. They say, no, we don't want to work with the for-profit housing providers. Why wouldn't you? We need everyone at the table. The tenant protectors and the tenant bill of rights, again, I just said it, the tenant advocates grew out of the eviction movement, and you need to be very careful when they're saying something, when they're looking for rights. What it normally does, it means it's taking something away from me. If you want the tenants to be able to live free, then that means that I am going to lose income. So watch the tenant advocates and the rights, because it sounds good, but then look carefully at what they're doing, what the protections are. Don't take money away from me, because that's the way I make my money and my living. It's a business. The long and inconsistent permitting process is something else that's a barrier that causes people not to get engaged in providing affordable housing. And then the hostile environment, the us versus them. And so I just say that we just need to be careful to know that these are some of the barriers. These are the things that will keep people like me from creating more housing. And so I'm going to talk about some solutions. So we don't, as business people, we always look for solutions. We don't just sit around and just talk about all of the problems. Like, okay, what can we do? And so we've committed, as my group, we said, okay, what do we need to do? What can we present to policymakers? And so we said, what are the things that would cause me to create more housing? So we have a policy proposal we put together. And we have a lot of things in the policy proposal, and I won't, of course, I can't go through all of them now, but it's a whole proposal that we've put together, and we've shared it with policymakers. Nobody's interested. Nobody is interested in the ideas that we have. This is us coming together saying what things would cause us to create more housing. And most of them are not going to take taxpayer dollars, because when we buy properties, we buy them on our own dimes. I'm not going before the council saying, hey, give me some money, give me a tax incentive. I'm not doing that. I'm using my own money, and I'm doing it quietly. I'll give you a quick example of that. I talked about I'm part of a couple of school projects where our goal is to eliminate homelessness. And we're looking around, we're saying there's just not a lot of inventory. How do we find housing? And so we had our school district, just not a lot of housing available. I pulled together some investors. And at that time, one of the investors went out and he found 2 houses. He bought those houses, and within a 3-week period on one of them and a 2-week on the other, he went from contract and buying them to having a homeless family in each of them. 3 weeks. Nonprofits and other big developers, when you're building things, you can't move that fast. We can move that fast. We have our own money. And so if our own ways of getting financing. So if you bring us to the table, some of it we need the nonprofits, yes. But some of it, we can go and take a house that already exists, renovate it, and get a family in there. We can move like that. 3 weeks. One of them was 2 weeks. From contract to a family, a homeless family in a home. Bring us to the table so that we can use the resources that we have. Really quickly, these are 5 things that we pulled out of this to say we're going to work on actively now. The first one is the loan rehab fund. We're going to do a loan loss reserve, and we're trying to get help from county, from city, whoever will talk to us, One of the biggest barriers we do have is financing. I can't go to a bank with my, I'm a real estate agent, I'm an investor, I don't get a regular paycheck. They have to look at my numbers, have to look at my profit and loss, and they have to work with me. Most banks don't understand it and won't work with me. We're trying to identify a lender that does know how we work, that works with real estate investors and understands you will get paid back. We have assets. So we're trying to get a loan rehab fund set up where a lender, where again, I'm going to borrow the money myself, I'm gonna pay it back, will loan us money to help with all the vacant properties out there. Let me buy some of those vacant properties, renovate them, and turn them into rentals or houses for sale. I need access to funding. A loan loss reserve will do that. And keeping in mind, that's where, for example, if let's say a city, a county would have $1 million loan loss reserve, I can get a lender to go out and raise money based on that. With $1 million, they can raise $10 million. If they know that the city has their back and will guarantee $1 million, I heard this from one 2 days ago, he can raise $10 million. That $10 million he can loan to people like me that will go buy properties, renovate them, and get them into useful inventory. So we're trying to get that set up. A voucher program, a master lease program, we're gonna talk about that in a real quick second. And then a shared risk, we're trying to get a program in place where those people who are hard to house, that may have been evicted with bad credit, that may be homeless, that the city will back them, will provide backing. If I rent to them, if they miss a rent payment, the city will cover it. So I may feel more comfortable renting to them because I know 4 months are gonna be covered. I'll take a chance, so we're trying to get that in place. We're trying to get accessory dwelling units where you can add a unit to your home in a finished basement, a third floor, or a carriage house where you can get more housing, because we need more housing. We're advocating for a policy going through the council with that. And then the eviction rehabilitation program, I'll talk about that in a second. So there's the loan loss reserve we're talking about. Again, my whole goal is there's vacant properties sitting now deteriorating. How do we get those into inventory? Use people like me, and you get the postcards, the phone calls all the time saying, will you sell your property? We want to buy properties. We want to buy them. Let's make them available, the ones that are vacant. Let's make it easy for me to finance them. Then the next thing I'll talk about, and I'll probably stop here. The voucher program. This is something that we're actively working on right now. It's not the Section 8 voucher because a lot of housing providers just don't want to work with the governmental program. It's not that we're racist, we're not classist, but some people just don't want to work with voucher programs because you don't want to have to wait, in our case in Kansas City, it could be 2 months before you get your first rent payment. Some people can't afford to wait 2 months with the red tape and the bureaucracy that goes behind them. And so this voucher program is one that we would use funding, some of the ARPA funding, and we make our own rules, who qualifies and how you qualify. In the beginning, my hope was that we could say, for me, the thing that makes it attractive to a housing provider, 5 years rent guarantee. If you put your house in the pool, you'll get rent for 5 years. Who would do that? I would, immediately. We learned that with some of the funding that's available now that that has to be spent before 2025, so maybe 2.5 years, but we are pushing for them to do that, to create a voucher program, guarantee me 2.5 years worth of rent, and I may think about coming back to business in Kansas City. I'm a business person, and if I know my rent's going to be paid to me for 2.5, 3 years, 5 years, I'll consider coming in, purchasing a vacant property, and immediately putting it in the pool. We're working with Restore, which is the second largest homeless shelter in the Kansas City area. We're working with the Housing Authority of Kansas City, who has over 14,000 people on the waiting list. And then we're working with housing providers like me who need to put some units out there and get renters to be in business, so it makes sense. Vacant houses, and give me a reason, a business reason, to put them in that housing pool. And so to me, this stuff makes sense. And our goal is to get 100 households to start. They're people who've been homeless for 60 days or less, so they're not chronic. Then maybe they were a paycheck away from homelessness and they ended up there. So we can get them back in housing fairly quickly, and we don't have to worry about training them, because people who've been chronically homeless need to be trained in a different way. And I think Julie talked about this and Jennifer talked about it, and how to use a house, how do you use a restroom and cook and manage a property. That's a big deal. So this is geared for people 60 days or less, so we can get them in, keep and prevent homelessness, the chronic, from happening. This is the housing industry, the Kansas Regional Housing Alliance working, setting our table, saying we will work with you. Here's what we want to do to eliminate homelessness. This is one step that we're taking. And then there are other things Jennifer could know about these, that the city can identify areas of the city where you can offer, where the city can say, we'll pay a lot prep fee. And then this exists right now. They can freeze property taxes if you have a geographical area that you want to focus on. and they have, builders, I mean, they have, for the builders, they have architects that have created blueprints, that you can choose one of the blueprints. You can have your lot prep fee, pay a tap fee for water, property taxes frozen. They're trying to incentivize development in certain areas. And so I will end there, and is it possible, I mean, that is close to the end. Yeah, okay, we want homeowner down payment assistance programs as well, because we want to incentivize people to own their home.
And there's actually a pilot of that with Kansas City, Missouri and Habitat right now. In priority zip codes.
That's right, it already exists, but they can do that, like, key coalition area,
Yeah,
right?
we've given, the Habitat for Humanity a loan fund so that they can help with, giving folks, in-house.
Into home ownership.
Neighbors. Yeah.
That's right, I'm gonna, if I could share two quotes with you. One is Thomas Sowell. If you don't know Thomas Sowell, he's an economist. The only way to get rid of poverty is to create wealth. Those who create the wealth destroy the poverty. I don't wanna always talk about low-income housing. I don't wanna always talk about people being in poverty like that is always forever. That does not have to be forever. And then Gloria Steinem said, well, people plan for 3 generations, poor people plan for Saturday night, that it is possible to get out of poverty. And I think we don't have time for questions. We don't have time for questions.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank Stacy and Jennifer and Julie for sharing their knowledge with us. It's been very helpful. I want to make sure you guys get out on time today. We do have the sessions down at for lunch, so if you find a table, we're going to have table topics and some good conversations.
That went by fast.
Thank you.
You know what?
You were very good. You were very good. You are very, very good. We are developing our accounts. You've done a lot of good ideas. I want to get
So you have my number, and then cell phones usually the best way.
Stacy Jones.
Stacy Jones. Okay, yes. Oh, wait, give me right. So what was that? No, I. And they. Yes. Okay, yes, but sometimes some people have to say it, some people can't say it, some people have nothing to lose like me, and so what do they?
I really loved your presentation. I thought it was great. It's nice to hear from realtors at these kind of things. So you mentioned the Kansas City program, the Healthy Home Inspection program. The city of Wichita, so we had a meeting with city council members earlier this week in government affairs with the Realtors Association. And they're looking at policies, programs that target bad actors.
Specifically only, and
Yes,
not
and
including all of us.
yeah, they invited us to the table to ask, what do you have in mind, what would you suggest? And we said, we don't know right now, but we'd love to get back to you. Do you have any ideas, or would you mind finding policies? Okay, I took a picture already.
Okay, now I'll tell you like what we did, because we tried to fight it, and we were successful at the council level, we created it, and then they put it on the ballot.
Well, that's part of
It's part of the
Yeah,
fight.
and then how do you fight something that says healthy homes rental?
No, we're not gonna say the realtors are against healthy homes.
So you can't.
It's good, isn't she?
But there's a different way, I mean, focus on the bad actors, I think that's what we're trying to do.
I'll give you a call, because I'd
You know,
love
maybe
to.
text me to tell me it's you or
That
whatever.
would be awesome. Yeah, I'll text you and let you know, just because I don't have any ideas right now, and I'm reaching out to the other government affairs directors and realtor associations.
And then the one with KCR, Derek Ramsey, he's on our team.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
put it all together.
Cool, well, thank you so much, I really appreciate it.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I actually had a question tangential to that, essentially. So our community, I'm in Salina, Kansas, and we don't have any sort of like registration information or knowing like which homes are actually renters versus homeowner occupied and something like that. And I really like the home locator aspect of that. But how do you sell that to small business renter landlords as far as so that it's not like a registration, so they know where to find you or whatever.
Yes. And where's Jennifer? Okay, Jennifer.
Yes.
I'm on the committee.
Because I feel like our community, for whatever reason, they would be like, well, this is just a way to figure out where we are so that you can track us and then you're gonna do all of this other thing.
No, because
They're a little bit
that's
suspicious of us.
and we are too.
You might know.
We would be too. We would be too, and as we're about to roll it out.
Right.
I'm gonna be working with Jennifer. As our voice there. I was our voice. She had me with him, as they picked the vendor.
Yeah.
So she had me at the table there. It's like, great.
Yeah.
And we're gonna be at the table when we start talking about how it looks, I believe. And so, what I'm looking for that to be, is to be like a Zillow. Just the database, put our information in, nobody's tracking, nobody's looking at us.
Right.
And so I think that's a beautiful question. Let's ask her together. She's talking with Jeff.
I mean, I do understand that there needs to be a middle ground between how do you make sure that the standards are there for your local landlords to make sure that they're coming in and doing housing.
Okay, that's different. Your heart, that's the health department, right? But the health department makes sure they're minimum property standards. Right. So that is already there. That is separate. That should not be part of this conversation.
Gotcha.
At all, right? Totally separate, totally different. So let me ask Jennifer, because I'm glad that you brought that up, because if we haven't got to the point.
Yeah, how can we have our teachers and our